After Cristiano Ronaldo came to America as just a high schooler at IMG Academy, Ronaldo would attend Miami and quickly become an impact player for them. They would upset Ohio State his sophomore season in the Orange Bowl, and after thinking they had enough talent to compete for the national championship his junior season, they would have to settle for the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl against ECU. They would go on to win back-to-back New Year's Six Bowls, something Miami hasn't done in a long time, as Ronaldo would go on to be the player of the game. For most football players, dominating in college meant playing in the NFL afterwards, but for Ronaldo, who was missing home in Portugal, his senior season would be the final season of him ever playing football again. And after coming second in the Heisman voting last season, he already put all of college football on notice. But after Miami struggled to take over this game against Toledo and run away with it, Ronaldo was questioning if this was really a national championship contending type of team. Jake Garcia will be able to take the lead here in the third quarter, but Ronaldo was still struggling on offense for the Canes. And a switch would flip in his head, because after getting popped on this play, he would go ahead and catch this deep wheel route, and no one was going to catch the fastest man in college football, regardless of if they had an angle on him or not. Miami would escape with a victory in their season opener against a much less talented Toledo team, but they definitely needed to tighten up because they were going to take on much better competition this season, and one of those teams was Notre Dame. After being down for most of the first half, Miami would finally throw this touchdown strike down the seam, and that touchdown would give them all the momentum that they needed because Miami and Ronaldo wouldn't give up that lead. The last few seasons, Ronaldo has been primarily a receiving back, and he would be pretty much dead even with his receiving numbers and rushing numbers, but this season they knew that they needed to feed him the rock as much as possible. This was the beautiful thing about college football because any given Saturday, any team could win. And even though Miami had 4- and 5-star recruits out that ass, Florida Atlantic stayed in this game the entire time. And they did that by keying in on Ronaldo, who they would hurt on this play in the second quarter, knocking him out for the rest of the half and most of the second half. They had to have a bounty on his head because they knew that he was their entire offense and Miami wouldn't score without him, but the defense would step up big. Ronaldo would finally come back in the game on this 3rd and 5 to help and seal this one. And after getting fully healthy the rest of that week, Miami and Ronaldo would take on an FCS opponent, basically a breather. Miami would pay this school $1.25 million to come to their place and whoop on them. But for most of the first half, things weren't really going as you would expect. Miami had just finally put a touchdown on the board with just a couple minutes left, and the offense was struggling way more than you would expect. Ronaldo was getting frustrated, and he would take it out on this defender here, and he would use his frustration on this speed option as he would take it down the sideline, getting deep into FCS territory. After Ronaldo gave the offense a speech at halftime that included a bunch of sueys, they would finally run away with this one in the 4th quarter, putting this touchdown on the board, but they needed to play much better. Playing in Death Valley was like playing at a park as an adult. It just didn't feel right. Clemson was one of the toughest teams in the ACC and Miami knew it. So getting this touchdown on a Hail Mary just before the half was monumental. And it looked like Miami was going to run away with this one as they would go up by 3 touchdowns in the 3rd quarter, but by the 4th with just a minute left. It was just a 5-point game and Miami needed to convert this 3rd and 8 to put this game away, and they would do one better as they would throw this touchdown pass, sealing the win for the number 3 team in the country. And Dabo Swinney was sick as shit. Miami had a huge game against Florida State the following week, and even though this wasn't the SEC or the Big Ten, ACC football was still difficult week in and week out. But this Florida State team wasn't like any of the Florida State teams in the past because they were getting absolutely bulldozed by the Hurricanes. This game was over by halftime as Miami would completely take control and score this touchdown as time expired in the first half. And after struggling in the first couple weeks of the season, it looked like Miami had finally found their groove as the number 2 team in the country. They couldn't celebrate for too long because they were getting ready to take on their biggest opponent of the year. This was the game of the week around the country, number 2 Miami versus number 4 Georgia Tech. Both teams were undefeated and Miami would be the first to strike in this one as Jake Garcia would find his receiver in the flat for the touchdown. This game was like when the Lakers traded for Russell Westbrook. It looked good on paper, but in practice, this shit was a disaster. Miami would literally and figuratively run away with this one. But I'm not gonna lie, Ronaldo low-key got a concussion on this catch because he would get boomsticked and he would miss most of the game after that, but the Miami offense wasn't struggling without him. Georgia Tech would be able to finally put their first points up on the board in the 3rd quarter with that field goal, and by the time Ronaldo came back in the game, this man's brain had to be absolutely scrambled after another devastating hit, and I couldn't tell you what the hell this Georgia Tech defender was doing, bro. The play not even there. After another decisive win, this time against a top 5 opponent that was extremely talented, Miami was feeling themselves, and Ronaldo was thinking maybe this was the year that they could finally win the national championship, and it was clear that Jake Garcia and Ronaldo had a great chemistry, and they were going to be able to carry this team a long way. The Duke Blue Devils were like peanut butter and fluff. super underrated. As a 2-4 team, you would think Miami would roll past them, but by the second quarter, Duke had tied this one up, and the Duke defense was locked in on Ronaldo as they were making big plays against him. After Duke was able to stop Ronaldo at the 1-inch line from scoring right before the half, Miami would have to settle for a field goal on this possession. And in the second half, Miami knew that they needed to go back to Ronaldo, but this time in the air because the ground game was getting stuffed. They would hit Ronaldo to get inside the 20 and on the very next play run a similar play which would get Ronaldo in the end zone, giving Miami the lead. With Miami only being up by 3 points, Jake Garcia would give a pep talk to the offense saying that they needed to step up, and that's exactly what they would do in the fourth quarter as they would drive the length of the field. The offense started clicking just in time, and Jake Garcia would complete this risky pass which would get caught and brought in for the touchdown. But Duke would answer right back with a touchdown of their own, and it was just a 3-point game. Miami needed to run the clock out, and this conversion on 3rd and 7 would be just enough to put this game away. And if Duke was like peanut butter and fluff, Miami was peanut butter and jelly. This would be the second worst day in Virginia Tech history, and if you know, you know. Because even though Virginia Tech was doing a great job of corralling Ronaldo and the Miami offense in the first half, they just couldn't do it for too long. Miami was the #1 team in the country for a reason, and Ronaldo was going to get busy eventually. By the end of the first half, it was already a 3-possession game, and even though Virginia Tech was knocking at the door in the second half, the Miami defense was coming up huge. That's one thing that doesn't get talked about enough. This Miami defense has been on a tear, but Miami wasn't blowing out teams like a #1 team should be, so they got dropped to #2 in the rankings. And there was something very strange about this game against North Carolina. The Tar Heels were just making enough plays to stay in this one, and Miami's offense was completely sputtering. Ronaldo couldn't do a damn thing with the rock. Bro, I swear it was like North Carolina took steroids before this game because they were on something else. And even when Ronaldo finally did break out a big run, he would get shoestring tackled again. North Carolina was at 5 wins, and they needed one more win to become bowl eligible. And making that happen against the #2 team in the country would put them on cloud 9. At this point in the season, any team that wasn't in contention for the ACC championship was just trying to play spoiler. And after North Carolina forced a safety in the third quarter, Miami would never be able to recover. Because even though Ronaldo tried to rally them going into the fourth quarter, this stop and a missed field goal on this possession would end the game, ending their perfect season. There couldn't be a worse start to a football game than this one. On the very first play of the game, Jake Garcia would pitch it to a downed Ronaldo, and Virginia would scoop it, bringing it inside the 5-yard line. Of course, Virginia would score, and they would take the early lead. And after losing their first game of the season last week, Miami was like a fat kid who didn't get their cake. Depressed. But Ronaldo was still one of the best players in the country, and he was still in the Heisman race, so he needed to put on a show for the voters. But doing that in the snow was definitely going to be difficult, and even though this game was tied just before the half, Ronaldo would go ahead and give them the lead. Virginia was punching back every time that Miami punched, and this game was still tied in the third quarter at 21. And it was time for the best player in the country to finally do his thing, and on this draw play, he would finally take off. Boy was looking like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in that snow. No one was catching him, and with the game on the line, Virginia needed to convert on this 4th and 4, but the Miami defense would come up big with this stop. Miami would just barely escape with the win, but these weren't the type of victories that they needed if they wanted to even sniff a chance at the national championship. And Ronaldo knew it as he posted almost 300 total yards from scrimmage. This game against Pitt was like trying to find a girl in Thailand. It was a trap. Miami was down by 17 at one point, but with back-to-back touchdowns by Ronaldo, the lead would get cut down. They really need to stop giving Ronaldo the option to throw the ball because this man would throw an interception as they were about to take the lead. And after Jake Garcia got hurt earlier in the game, the backup would come in and make a huge conversion on 4th and 4, basically saving the season. They put Ronaldo back in at Wildcat quarterback, but instead of throwing it, he would actually run it. Jake Garcia would muster up enough strength to come back just as this game was coming to an end. He would throw the touchdown to win the game, and Miami was getting ready for Clemson in the ACC championship. Miami had already played this Clemson team earlier in the season, and the game came down to the very last possession. Clemson obviously wanted to get their revenge against Miami, and it's very difficult to beat teams 2 times in a season. But the whole defense was so preoccupied by Ronaldo that they left this receiver wide open. But it only makes sense for the Clemson defense to try and neutralize one of the biggest weapons in college football. But at the end of the day, it's easier said than done. And the only person that can hurt Ronaldo was Ronaldo, because why the hell is this man throwing the football? Miami was going to go ahead and easily win this ACC championship game against a very talented Clemson team, but it didn't look like they had enough to make it to the national title game. This wasn't the ending to the season that Ronaldo and Miami had envisioned going into this year. I mean, at the end of the day, this was the Orange Bowl. It wasn't like the Duke Mayo Bowl or anything crazy like that. But everyone knows in today's landscape of college football, it's national championship or bust. But just because they weren't in the national championship game, Miami wasn't going to take this game for granted. And this was Cristiano Ronaldo's very last game for the Hurricanes and his his very last football game in America. My dog had his flight booked back to Portugal the day after this game, on some Nikola Jokic shit, and with the game on the line, who else would Miami go to but Ronaldo? And it was only right that Ronaldo would make one of the best plays of the season to end his career. He would avoid 6 Oklahoma State defenders on his way to the go-ahead touchdown in the Orange Bowl, but Oklahoma State still had a chance with over a minute left on the clock and all 3 of their timeouts. This long completion would put them deep into Miami territory, but the Miami defense would do what they did the last 2 big bowl games and make a big play at the end of the game. And even though Ronaldo came second in the Heisman voting by the slimmest margin in college football history, he was still leaving Miami as an absolute legend. And if you enjoyed this series and got this far, please subscribe. I appreciate you.